What's up, everybody? Welcome to a brand new episode of Part of the Problem. I am Dave Smith. I am glad to be home, and I am even more glad to be joined by my partner in crime, Rob Bernstein. How are you, sir?
Doing well. Missed you this weekend, bud.
Oh, you have no idea. No, I missed you too. It was weird. It was weird to do a gig without you. It's been a long time. Been really a long time since I've done, I think, any stand-up gigs without you. Didn't feel right. But it was fun. Thanks to everybody who came out to Detroit. And of course, now we are in the march toward Rob Bernstein's first ever comedy special, which is, what's the date?
It's this Saturday. Early show sold out. Woo! Still tickets for the late show. And then I got New York this Thursday. Show up, New York people. Don't let these little towns in the middle of the woods outsell you on tickets. Step it up.
That's right. It's an embarrassment, New York. You should be beating these guys.
Yeah. Let's. There's no reason why the middle of West Virginia woods pulls more people than New York City on a Thursday night. Let's go.
All right. Well, listen. I'll say this as we're live now. So for the subscribers, of course, we're live at partoftheproblem.com. That's the only place you can get the show live, uncensored, ad-free. So go sign up over there.
And with full streaming videos, because YouTube harasses us.
Yeah.
People don't see the strikes we're getting behind the scenes.
And, the rule is that you're allowed to use the news. So we're always allowed to play clips from the news.
Right.
And then they gave us a copyright strike for playing a clip from Colbert. And you're like, are you telling me that's a comedy show? Is that you're going to look me in my face and tell me Colbert in the last 8 years has been doing comedy? That's what that was, his interview with Kamala Harris? So anyway, it's bullshit. But I will say this. I will, as soon as the show's over, I will tweet out the link for the second show. Ooh. Where there's still some tickets left. So if you want to come out, if you can be in the Denver area and come out to see Rob's first ever comedy special, this is the only chance you'll ever get to see live his first comedy special. So I'll tweet out that link, and that way our subscribers, first to go check it, and then before you know it, they'll be gone.
Thank you, sir.
Of course. And then after that's all done and Rob has a big adrenaline dump, he'll be out in Kansas City with me. So if you want to come see Rob with no motivation and no material, come on out to Kansas City.
I'm holding it 2 weeks because I got the show after that, and then we'll dump it. So
there you go. That's
times,
true.
yeah.
It's not out yet. Okay, so there you go. So
I'm holding it 2 weeks on purpose, and I know I'm gonna have that perfect tag where I'm like, we got to refilm.
Dude, I swear it's happened. It's happened to me. Not that I've put out that many, but I put out 2 comedy specials, and with both of them, it's so frustrating because you're basic. No, with Libertas, it wasn't really like that because I think I did weirdly I buried that material that night. Like I think I ended up going back to it at one point. Like it was like I tried a little bit,
right.
But I know with this last one, it was, you film it, it's not out yet. So then the next week you're out on the road and you're still like, okay, well, I'll still do that material until the special's out. And then I got to stop doing it. And of course, it was like clockwork. Like every bit, I just found a new tag for it that was perfect. You're like, oh, this bit's so much better now with that. But of course, it's already been
That's the way it goes.
recorded. But this is, we all have our struggles in life. And this is the burden of the real hard work of doing stand-up comedy. Anyway, yeah, I'm really looking forward to you guys all seeing Rob's special. It's a phenomenal material, and a lot of you guys who have come out and seen us on the road over the last year have seen some of it. But for those of you who haven't, you're gonna love it. Okay, so there's a bunch of stuff going on that I wanted to talk about, and I think a lot of it could kind of all be brought back to one major theme. Here we are. It is, what is it? Today's the 14th? 14th. So it's the 14th of October. We are very, very in the fourth quarter of this presidential election. And a lot of, particularly in very close elections, which by just about anyone's estimation this is, that in itself is kind of insane to me. And as I've been saying for a while, it's a reflection on Donald Trump, if you ask me, that he's even allowing this to be close. Whatever. I won't even say that. But he should be smoking this chick. Like there is that's just how I feel about it. I think it's unbelievable to all right, I will say it. This is what I was going to say because I said this on the Zoom meeting that we had the other day with subscribers. that I kind of made the comparison between it's like when I debated Laura Loomer. If you came away from that debate and you were like, it was pretty close, about half the audience thinks she won, about half the audience thinks I won, then I lost. That's an L. Like, that's a horrible L. It should be like, if there's a poll after that debate, I should take minimum 85, 90% of it. Like, there's no way this should even be left up to, and I guess that's the same thing with Kamala Harris. Like, if you have a debate with Kamala Harris, or if you're running a race against her and it's neck and neck, what are you doing? How have you allowed this? She's a cardboard cutout of a person. She's not even, I mean, it's not, dude, when you see her in interviews, it looks like it's a Saturday Night Live skit. Like, you ever see there's a bunch of people like online, have you seen them like doing impressions of her? I think even Saturday Night Live has someone doing an impression of her, and the impression is just what she does. Like, the joke is just that you'd be like, what's your stance on immigration? And you'd be like, I come from a middle-class family. And blah, blah. It's like, yeah, when she answers the question, it sounds like she's doing a sketch of herself. And anyway, October really matters in terms of in presidential elections, particularly close ones. It's the same way, like if there's a basketball team, you have a long season in the NBA, it's like 82 games. The team that's killing it in April, like if you're coming into your own right as you're going into the playoffs, I think April's when playoffs are, somewhere around there, March maybe. That's just much better. You want to be getting hot right as you go into the games that really matter. And it seems to me there are several indications that whatever the little kind of bump that Kamala Harris had at the beginning has really faded, and that Trump is surging. Now, don't get me wrong, it's still very close. And if you're a Trump supporter, you should be just like appalled that it's a close race. But it does seem like there's several indications that it's looking more likely Trump than Kamala Harris. I don't know if you've been.
That's my read at the moment, and it seems like every interview Kamala does, her stock goes down a little bit.
I mentioned this. I can't remember if it was on the Zoom meeting or the members only stream the other day, but David Sachs, who's just an incredibly sharp guy, really really interesting guy to listen to. He had kind of made this prediction a few weeks back, maybe even over a month ago. He said something like it was like when Kamala Harris was first having her little surge, he basically said that, look, what she's got to get worried about is getting caught in the death spiral. And essentially the way I'm maybe not doing this justice, but this is more or less what he was saying, was that he goes, look, she's avoiding all of these interviews right now because they know she really doesn't do good in interviews. However, if she starts fading, they're going to have no choice but to put her out into interviews. But then you're in this situation where, in order to save yourself, you're doing the thing that you were trying to avoid that hurts yourself. So you fall a little bit in the polls, you go do another interview. That makes you fall a little bit more, so you have to do another interview. And that, you know what I mean? And like, I do think there's something to be said for that. I think that what I was describing, looking like a Saturday Night Live sketch, is not good. And Americans are not necessarily the most informed people, or as informed as we'd all like them to be, but most regular people know when you're avoiding a question, or know when that wasn't a real answer. Like, I don't think you can I was born in a middle class family and everyone cared about their lawn your way into this. And there was one thing that was interesting to me is that the betting markets seem like the polls seem to be lagging behind the betting markets. The betting markets started moving way in Donald Trump's favor, and now the polls seem to be slowly coming over that way too. I've seen, if you look through like at the swing states, particularly, I know I saw it was of the three swing states. I think it was Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, and I can't remember the third one. It might have been Georgia. But they were breaking down these three swing states and the margins in 2016, 2020, and 2024 with the latest polls. And it's like, I think they were it was like Hillary Clinton was like up 9 on an average and still ended up losing. Joe Biden was like up 7 and they ended up being closer than that. And Kamala Harris was like +1. And you're like, oh, so now if past performance is an indication, it does seem like if you were a Democrat, you'd be pretty nervous about where we're at right now. So
I think your typical mom, which is that college-educated mom seems to be the big, like, flipping demographic. I think some of them, if they've been paying attention to Kamala Harris, must be like, I don't know that I feel comfortable with this.
Yeah. Well, this is obviously just totally anecdotal, but I have talked to a few different people I know who are lifelong Democrats who are just staying home. Like they're not voting for Trump. Like they can't bring themselves to vote for Trump, but they're just even kind of like, I just cannot actually cast a ballot for this woman to say she ought to be the president. I mean, come on. And yeah, anyway, it's it'll be interesting to see this. Now, I will say, I had mentioned on the show that, and this was before I saw a change in the polls, but it was just the betting markets. But I had mentioned last week at some point that the fact that they're sending her out on all these interviews indicates that they're not very comfortable. Like if your strategy is to keep Kamala Harris in the basement, right? Like that's to run the Joe Biden 2020 campaign. We're not going to do these interviews. She took forever to do the first one with Dana Bash, where she brought Waltz with her. And then all of a sudden you see her going out and doing all these interviews. You're like, well, clearly if you thought this strategy was working, you weren't going to send her out to this. I'd say there's several more indications that the Democrats are worried. It seems to me like the Democrats are starting to go into panic mode. And I think almost all of these clips that we're going to play here are kind of going to be on that theme, that it's like, oh, these guys seem to be very concerned about Donald Trump getting back in. All right, let's jump into them. Whatever order you got them in, it doesn't really matter. So let's see what we got here.
Understand what you're saying, that some people left behind, but he's making these statements that the mayor is flat out disputing.
Well, Martha, you just said the mayor said they were exaggerated.
Grossly exaggerated.
That means there's got to be some element of truth here. And of course, President Trump was actually in Aurora, Colorado, talking to people on the ground. And what we're hearing, of course, Martha, is that people are terrified by what has happened with some of these Venezuelan gangs.
Senator Vance, I'm going to stop you because I know exactly what happened.
Martha.
I'm going to stop you. The incidents were limited to a handful of apartment complexes, and the mayor said our dedicated police officers have acted on those concerns. A handful of problems.
Only, Martha, do you hear yourself? Only a handful of apartment complexes in America were taken over by Venezuelan gangs, and Donald Trump is the problem and not Kamala Harris's open border. Americans are so fed up with what's going on, and they have every right to be. And I really find this exchange, Martha, sort of interesting because you seem to be more focused with nitpicking everything that Donald Trump has said rather than acknowledging that apartment complexes in the United States of America are being taken over by violent gangs. I worry so much more about that problem than anything else here. We've got to get American communities in a safe space again. And unfortunately, when you let people in by the millions, most of whom are unvetted, most of whom you don't know who they really are, you're going to have problems like this. Kamala Harris, 94 executive orders that undid Donald Trump's successful border policies. We knew this stuff would happen. They bragged about opening the border, and now we have the consequences, and we're living with it. We can do so much better, but frankly, we're not going to do better, Martha, unless Donald Trump calls this stuff out. I'm glad that he did.
Okay, let's just end that with they did not invade or take over the city, as Donald Trump said. I want to move on to.
Listen, this is where I will say this type of thing is where J.D. Vance, I think, is pretty effective. Me and you have never been like hardcore J.D. Vance fans, and there's certainly a lot left to be desired from him as a politician, as a leader. But he's very, very good in these moments, and that was just so amazing. That was almost the perfect microcosm of the entire Trump phenomenon. Basically, since Donald Trump has been running for office, it's that this is the old thing. I don't remember. I always say it was Peter Thiel, but I think he's not the one who coined this. I think he just took it from someone else. So I don't know who should be credited with this, but it's so perfect. Is that he said Donald Trump supporters always took him seriously, but never took him literally. And the corporate media never took him seriously and always took him literally. And like, that's the perfect example of it right there, where Donald Trump will say something. Of course, it's always exaggerated. You know what I mean? It's never like exactly right. But then the media always ends up blowing up about how he exaggerated, you know? And then it's like that becomes the whole story. And I thought J.D. Vance was maybe the first one I've ever heard on one of the big corporate media platforms actually arguing back like, okay, fine. So maybe he exaggerated it. But what's actually, like, how crazy is it that you're more outraged by the exaggeration than this very real problem? And she has no response to that except to go, yeah, but I think we can all agree he exaggerated. And like, yo, what the? I mean, I don't know. It's just like, is there a better example of it than that right there?
That almost sounded like a Norm Macdonald joke the way he said it.
Yeah.
With the repeat of like the punchline of, I don't know, I think we should be concerned that Venezuelans have taken over a couple apartment buildings. Well, that sounds like a really big symptom of what could be a big problem with all the people you brought over the border, and that we should be talking about it. He's almost reframing it as, why are you trying to cover for this administration on what sounds like could be a major and dangerous issue?
Yeah. Well, it's like if someone like broke into your house and like stabbed 2 people, and then somebody else was just like, they slit everyone's throat. And you're like, no, they didn't slit everyone's throat. They just stabbed 2 people who were in the house. It's kind of like, okay, but your takeaway from that is like, what an outrageous liar that guy. It's like, well, I mean, okay, maybe he should be more precise or something, but at least he's addressing a situation that's a major concern. And the other thing, why I just, you know, you look at this and you start to understand why so many of the Democrats are kind of in freak out mode, is that, look, man, like the number 1 and number 2 issues in this race is the economy and immigration. And is this your strategy, really? By the way, that might be the theme of today's show. You go, is this your strategy, really? Like, this is what you've got? We're in the 4th quarter. This is like, you know, go for it time. You're telling me your strategy is not to argue about who's going to solve the problem or who's to blame for the problem. Your argument is to tell people it's not real? I mean, this was, by the way, not exaggerating. We covered it extensively here on the show. This was for the last year, way before the 4th quarter, in the first 3 quarters when it was Joe Biden running. This was their strategy on the economy, to tell everybody that you're wrong. And in fact, it's a great economy. And yeah, I know all these polls of the American people say that they all think this is a shitty economy, but I'm sorry, you're wrong. And we're here to explain to you that none of that's real. You know how it feels like the prices of everything are going up? No, that's because you're stupid. That was their strategy for the first 3 quarters of this presidential election. They openly said it. They openly said the economy isn't bad. We just haven't been able to sell it yet to the people. We played tons of clips this year off of that. And it seems almost like this is the strategy here too, to be like, oh, you're exaggerating. This isn't really a thing. Except, you know, Tucker Carlson had this great, he was talking about this the other day, and he had a great line about it, you know, but it was like, he was like, okay, like if you're saying this isn't a problem, so let's start with all your neighborhoods. You know, let's start with every rich suburb outside DC, and let's start with Martha's Vineyard and like Westchester and Bel Air, and, you know, let's send a ton of migrants to all those neighborhoods. And you know, of course, what was it the one time they did send migrants to Martha's Vineyard? Oh, no one was downplaying the problem then. They got them the hell out of there real quick because they said they didn't have the resources. They didn't have the resources in a summer town. It was in spring. No one's there. They got nothing but empty houses. Mansions, by the way. But that problem got taken care of real quick. It's only like when it's your neighborhood There's no issue. And look, I'll tell you, I know, 'cause I've talked to people who live in Manhattan who have been dealing with this over the last year, and they're all like, yeah, it's a real problem. And these are not right-wing conservatives I'm talking to. I'm talking to people who live on the Upper West Side, you know? I used to live there. I know a decent amount of people who live there. And they're all like, yeah, it's a real problem, man. Like, the migrants are all over the place. And, you know, stories they were telling me about, like, and not even like stories like this. It's not like, oh, they were invading apartment complexes, but it's more stories about how, like, there's children, like, outside without shoes who are just, like, selling candy bars and stuff. But, you know, like, it's not like a service to the economy. They're essentially begging for money. You know what I mean? And, yeah, it's a major problem.
So
like, we don't know what to do
So
here.
they're stealing jobs from the urban youth. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, right. Exactly.
Some kids out there trying to get something for his basketball team.
That was the old thing
affecting Black America. That's what I'm hearing.
That used to be very big. By the way, when I was younger and on the subways in New York City, it was black teenagers selling candy for their basketball team, which was never really a basketball team. But again, I mean, it's not like...
But it was believable because they were black.
Right. I mean, they probably had a basketball team, almost certainly. I mean, I would pick them if we were doing that. But anyway, this strategy of saying, like, okay, this problem doesn't exist, or isn't it appalling that Donald Trump is exaggerating this problem? It just seems like such a losing strategy on its face. Like, there's just no way that's going to work well. And the other thing that I always thought was kind of amazing about it was that, look, Donald Trump, just however you feel about him, well before he was a political figure, let's say, well, way before 2016, you know, just Donald Trump, who he is, it's like, you kind of get within 30 seconds of seeing him that you're like, yeah, he's bombastic. No kidding. You know what I mean? Like, you're like, oh no, he's exaggerating. Yeah, no kidding. His whole life is the most exaggerated thing ever. And like, you almost like, this is, I think, what the quote that I might be falsely attributing to Peter Thiel is kind of getting at, is that you kind of learn right away with Donald Trump that, yeah, he speaks like a third grader. And like, if Donald Trump goes, I just built the biggest building that's ever been built, what he means is, I just built a big building. It's not literally the biggest building that's ever been built, but that's always how he's going to sell it. I had the biggest crowd ever. It's like, okay, he just means it's big, you know? And like, okay, maybe he shouldn't do that. But again, that's not really what's going to be driving people. I see no way that this strategy works.
I think the media is just selling themselves down the drain and so obviously displaying the fact that they're trying to cover up and pick a team and really just engaging in propaganda.
There's something to that dynamic that I think is, you know, I don't even know the best way, how exactly to say this, but that dynamic, what you're talking about, is something that kind of permeates the ruling class in America. It's one of the most disturbing trends. It's what it is it's a high time preference is what it is. It's like, oh, there's not even a little part of you that thinks like, hey, look, we really don't want Trump to get elected. We really want Kamala Harris to get elected. But we also recognize that we're going to have wants in 2 years, in 5 years, in 10 years. And we can't burn all of our credibility right now to get the thing that we want in the next 20 days. You know what I mean? Like, we have to think ahead, and there's just like no sense of that. And that's true with everything. That's why we're in $35 trillion of debt. It's like nobody is even thinking about, you know, it's like we know the ship's going down. I'm just trying to steal everything I can before that happens. It's very unsettling. All right, guys, let's take a moment and thank our sponsor for today's show, which is Proton VPN. Proton created Proton VPN to further protect the journalists, activists, and everyday citizens who use Proton Mail. Proton VPN breaks down the barriers of internet censorship, allowing you to access restricted online content. Proton's secure VPN sends your internet traffic through an encrypted VPN tunnel tunnel to keep your browsing data safe, even over public or untrusted internet connections. And as a Swiss VPN provider, Proton does not log user activity or share data with third parties. Their anonymous VPN service keeps your browsing history private and enables an internet without surveillance. Proton VPN is available on all of your devices, including PCs, Macs, smartphones, even routers. A secure internet connection you can trust is essential to maintaining your privacy on your laptop at home, your mobile device on the road, or your workstation at the office. And to check out an exclusive and limited time offer, go to protonvpn.com/Dave Smith. Once again, this is a limited time offer. So right now, go check it out at protonvpn.com/Dave Smith. All right, let's get back into the show.
It's a very nerdy example, but in the first Star Wars movie, which is not a very good Star Wars movie, the guy tries pulling the Jedi mind trick on I forget the character's name, and he goes, your Jedi mind tricks don't work on me. And that's almost what the media's gotten down to, is they're used to just being able to say, there is no problem. And, all right, there is no problem. But it doesn't work anymore when you're so obviously lying, and that's what makes that segment so funny, is him being able to say, wait, so you admit that there are Venezuelan gangs that have taken over apartment buildings.
I'm like, yes, but it was limited to a few, and the local police tell us that they have responded.
Yeah, that sounds like a disaster.
Like, okay, I mean, yeah, but like I guess that's good they responded, but like that should never happen in the United States of America, in most people's estimation. Okay, let's keep moving. What do we have here? What do we got next?
I would say the extent to which, she and I certainly have had our disagreements. But when you look at the whole range of issues, for example, with respect to support for Ukraine, with respect to the fact that, she is saying that the United States has to lead in the world, Donald Trump is embracing tyrants. Donald Trump loves tyrants. He idolizes them. J.D. Vance and Donald Trump both support a very isolationist foreign policy and an erratic and a chaotic foreign policy that will leave us much less safe.
Do you regret any of the language that you used to describe Harris and Biden at the time? They would dismantle our freedom, destroy our history, the type of language you're using now about Donald Trump?
Look, I think certainly those were harsh things that I said. I think that they reflect absolutely that we had a policy disagreement on a series of issues. But I also think that's why it's so important for people to focus on the fact that I am supporting her now, and that there's such a broad coalition that's coming together to support her. And it's based in part on who she is, on the fact that she will lead with a sincere heart, on the fact that she is somebody who's dedicated her life to public service, and looking at what Donald Trump poses, the kind of chaotic, absolute depravity that he would bring if he were ever to be elected again.
All right. So there was Liz Cheney. I thought this was like one of the most amazing clips I've ever seen. There was Liz Cheney, as I'm sure you guys know, right? Daughter of Dick Cheney. And this is who the Harris campaign has coming out on the Sunday shows. And look, didn't she just give the whole game away right there? See, there's something really interesting about this where she goes, look at the broad coalition of support that Kamala Harris has. Now, when you say this broad coalition of support, look, just objectively, again, I'm not saying like trust the polls or don't trust the polls or whatever, but if you just use them as any indication, as the corporate media certainly does, right? Objectively, she's doing substantially worse right now than Hillary Clinton was against Trump or than Joe Biden was against Donald Trump at this time. So, you can tell me this broad coalition of support, but I don't know. It's less broad than it's been against him in his last two presidential elections. Now, of course, both sides want to make this argument that they have this broad coalition. The truth is that this is a very close race by all indications right now. This is a race that it seems like if you ran it 10 days in a row, 10 different times, you might get 5 and 5. You know what I mean? Or maybe 6 and 4, but it's something pretty close like that. But okay, so there's a coalition, behind Donald Trump, and he's got these figures like Elon Musk and Tulsi Gabbard and Bobby Kennedy Jr. and like these people who were traditionally Democrats who are coming over and supporting him. And then Kamala Harris also has some people who were traditionally Republicans coming over and supporting her. The obvious difference here is that it's all establishment insiders who are supporting Kamala Harris, and it's all the kind of dissidents who are supporting Trump. But look, it's just amazing. I mean, you really, and I think part of it is my age, because I think if you were 20 or 25, you probably couldn't appreciate as much how crazy this is. But Dick Cheney was the national villain amongst liberals and leftists, and for a reason, because he was like the main architect of the war in Iraq, this war that they lied the American people into, that was an absolute disaster. And of course, all of the war on terror, stuff that comes along with that, the Patriot Act and torture and Guantanamo Bay and Abu Ghraib, like all these things are like attached to Dick Cheney. Okay. But now we're supposed to, because, Donald Trump didn't accept the election results or something, we're supposed to, it's not only that we pretend that none of those things are problems anymore with Dick Cheney. He's now like a hero. His daughter now is some type of hero for standing up to the Republicans. But look here, Liz Cheney really gives away the game. Now, again, she may use slightly different language than I would or you would, but as I often do on this show, I try to encourage people to like look at what's really being said here, because it's not even like she's hiding it. Why is it that she's supporting Kamala Harris? And she tells you right there, American leadership abroad, backing Ukraine. These guys are isolationists. These guys. In other words, she can be counted on to fight the next war, and Donald Trump cannot. Here you have a Cheney explicitly making the argument that one candidate is good for the war machine and the other one might not be. Now, of course, listen, if you could get over what a joke it is to call Trump an isolationist, it's like, come on. That might apply to his trade policy a little bit. It certainly doesn't apply to his foreign policy. But I just thought that was an amazing moment. Again, you're almost wondering, are you guys cutting ads for Donald Trump? Like, is that the game here? Because I couldn't think of anything to help Donald Trump more than having Dick Cheney's daughter come out and say, I can't support him, but I can support her because she's essentially got the same foreign policy as my dad. Like, Jesus.
The war machine has picked our candidate, and it's Kamala Harris. My father feels the same way, because if we need someone who's going to keep fighting these pointless wars, we're voting for Kamala.
Yeah.
It's pretty remarkable that you feel comfortable getting on the news and giving this pitch.
And just that, she brings up at one point, which was very interesting too, is she goes, oh, you've talked about in the past how much you hate the Democrats and you're against them. And she's like, well, yeah.
Not when it comes to keeping a war going.
We had policy disagreements, but I think that just shows you how great it is that because she's honest and she's this. And you're like, yeah, but you already told us what it really is. She'll keep fighting the war in Ukraine. And you could actually trust her to keep fighting the war in Gaza, And that's the whole game right there. That it's almost like, oh yeah, remember? And this is one of the things, despite all of the qualities that are so infuriating about Donald Trump, because it's like, it really is, right? It's like we always say, like if you just never, if Donald Trump almost didn't exist and only the other side existed, like that right there is a great argument to vote for Donald Trump. That's the best case for Donald Trump, is Liz Cheney loves the other person. That's the best argument there is to vote for him. But it does, one of the things that Donald Trump kind of revealed, whether intentionally or not, and I kind of tend to think it's not intentionally, but one of the things he revealed is that the whole game used to rely on you believing that Liz Cheney and Mitt Romney really hated Hillary Clinton. Like they really were totally different than Hillary Clinton. And they were like, oh my God, we're appalled by her reckless policy. But as soon as somebody kind of like, it's almost like if their little world was here, as soon as somebody was here, You saw how close they all are. And they're like, no. Oh, this Democrat-Republican thing, that means nothing. I'll switch over party lines to support someone as long as someone who's outside of our little, window of allowable opinion is denied the ability to get in. And like, there you go. It's like, oh yeah, well, how can you come over to Kamala Harris when you were just saying, oh, these Democrats are going to destroy the country and all that? And she's like, oh, well, she's a good, honest, great person. It's like, oh, so you actually had no problem with her at all. Oh, in other words, that was all just bullshit. And this is, something that I think, I know I was, and a lot of good people were screaming this for years, that the whole two-party system in America is all a facade. It's always been a uniparty, and it was always like whether it was when Mitt Romney was running against Barack Obama, or if Hillary Clinton had run against Jeb Bush, as was the plan until Trump came in, or Gore, Bush, or like any of these guys, it was always like, on all of the issues that matter, there is no difference between these two candidates. And look, in terms of the way he governed, you could kind of make that argument about Trump too. That Trump really did keep all of the uniparty policies going. However, right here, you just see it perfectly. That it's like, what? Donald Trump, who, by the way, was the president for 4 years and did not dismantle the war machine. It's not as if there wasn't a military-industrial complex during Trump's reign. In fact, it had 4 great years for them. But still, just the fact that he'll even question it sometimes is enough that the Cheneys, I think Cheney is actually how they pronounce it.
Really?
But whatever, yeah. But Cheney, as the rest of us all know.
The dicks
of the world. They are ready to jump ship and support a Democrat as soon as they can. And the other thing that I just thought was really interesting about it is that the thing that it reveals also is that, again, something I've been saying for many years now, is that when push comes to shove, you see that the neocons only really care about their wars. Nothing else matters to them. Because, when they were, I remember when the neocons were dominant in the Republican Party. And I mean dominant. Like, they were as dominant in the Republican Party as any faction could be. As dominant as anti-racism is in college campuses. You know what I mean? Like they ran the George W. Bush administration top to bottom. And when they were there, when they were the Republicans, they used to talk about all these other issues that they cared about a lot. Obviously the wars were always, even in their words, were first, but it was like, tax cuts and cultural conservatism, marriage being between a man and a woman, like whatever the issue of the day was that pandered to conservatives to get their votes. But as soon as the war is questioned, they'll go, oh, actually, we're for gay marriage and increased taxes and what, you know what I mean? We're progressives culturally. Like they'll give up on any of those other issues. The one issue that they will never change course on is that there's always a next war that we should be fighting. Always.
Every kid gets a new dick. As long as
yeah. Can I bomb around? Okay. Then you could turn your son into a daughter.
Pretty incredible.
All right, guys, let's take a moment and thank our sponsor for today's show, which is My Patriot Supply. I've been telling you guys about this company for a while. I absolutely love them. If you're anything like me, and if you listen to this show, my guess is you probably are, you like to be prepared. You know how unstable the world has been over the last few years. And right now, you can get prepared with 3-month emergency food kits from My Patriot Supply. The entire kit offers over 2,000 calories every day. That's why I keep them in my home. The food kits last up to 25 years. Who knows what the country is going to look like by then, but I like to know that whatever it looks like, there'll be food for my family. So go check out my site, preparewithsmith.com now to order your 3-month emergency food kit from My Patriot Supply. That's preparewithsmith.com. All right, let's get back into the show. Yeah, it really is something. Okay, let's keep moving because there were several other interesting moments from the last few days. So let's keep playing. Ah, yes, there's a good one.
have not yet seen the same kinds of energy and turnout in all quarters of our neighborhoods and communities as we saw when I was running. Now, I also want to say that that seems to be more pronounced with the brothers. So if you don't mind, just for a second, I'm going to speak to y'all directly and say that when you have a choice that is this clear, when on the one hand you have somebody who grew up like you, knows you, went to college with you, understands the struggles and pain and joy that comes from those experiences. Who's had to work harder and do more and overcome and achieves the second highest office in the land.
All right. So
Cut off a little early.
yeah, but I mean, this is essentially the message was that you're a bad person. It's very Obama. This was always how the Obamas were, and there was always something that really bothered me about this. So when Barack Obama was running for president, I remember back in 2008 when he was running for president the first time, and he would give these like amazing speeches. Speeches were like fucking flawless. I mean, like, and again, they were always light on substance. It was kind of just like poetry, but they were beautiful poems, like just really, I mean, if there was just like, it was almost like an empty template of how you give a political speech, but they would always be just like amazing, and he's just, I think in terms of like the prose and the delivery, the best political speaker I've ever seen. It was like truly something like remarkable about the guy. Far better than like Martin Luther King. Even. And Martin Luther King was really good at giving a speech, but people kind of play like the best clips of his moments. If you go watch like a full Martin Luther King speech and then go watch a full Barack Obama speech in his day, Barack Obama crushes him, blows him out of the water. Like it's just beautiful. It's always I know I quote it before, but I always fucking remember these little things from his speeches where he would just because I would always say like, man, if there was ever a great libertarian leader, I hope he could do this. Like, I hope he could, like, you know what I mean? Like, give it where just like these things where he'd get up in his acceptance speech and he'd be like, I love this country, and so do you, and so does John McCain. So do the men and women who have fought and died for this country. By the way, these men and women have been Democrats and Republicans and independents, but they did not die defending a red America or a blue America. They died defending the United States of America. And it's just like, but even like as you see, you're like, sure, fucking let's go, Obama. Like it was just like, and now listen, if you examine that, he didn't say anything. Like what? I mean, it's empty rhetoric, but it was just like beautiful. And you just see crowds of tens of thousands of people like crying and losing their minds, and you'd be like, wow, maybe this guy will be like a great president, like the next Jack Kennedy or something, but then whenever he'd get a tough question or something like that, it would always like essentially be the answer is like, hey, you're a bad person. If you don't support me, you're like a bad person. You must be racist. I guess that's what it is. His wife is exactly the same way. It's appalling. Like she said it in one of the speeches at the DNC, not this year, but it might have been the 2016 convention. She said something along the lines of like, she goes, I know there's been critics of me and my husband, and when you're when people who look like you used to be picking the crops outside the White House and now you're in the White House, you're going to get a lot of people who don't like seeing you there very much. And you're like, yo, wait a minute. I'm sorry. Your husband won a landslide election, was then reelected president. And now you're essentially saying that if anybody's critical of him after 8 years of being president, if anyone is critical of the job he did, that's just because we're such a racist country? Like, how are we such a racist country if your husband just got elected and then reelected? You know, so there's a lot of that. But it's still amazing to me to see, like, this to me seems like the thing that Barack Obama would say to Michelle Obama on their couch. You know what I mean? Like, she'd be like, I think they're all sexist. That's right. But that wouldn't actually be your message that you took out to voters. Hey, you're sexist. Come back. Like, what? What type of message is that? I'm sorry. Like, at what point is it like, if Kamala Harris cannot carry the black vote, how is that on the black voters? That's not on her. It's not on her to persuade them. It's on them to not be a bad person. You're a bad person if you're not supporting our candidate. What? Like, what a stupid fucking message.
I think it's bad marketing and people are sick of being lectured to. To me, this is kind of like that Phillips Norelco commercial with where men being men. Remember that? And it was it was terrible.
Yes.
And by the way, Kamala put out a terrible ad last week with men being like, "Oh, we're strong men, and that's why we're voting for Kamala because that's our masculinity." But it was the same marketing campaign of lecturing to people, which I think they're over. Now, what's particularly not smooth of him. And firstly, I can't unsee him as an old gay guy now. That's all I see. That's just, he talks and I'm like, yeah, you're fetching at us because you're an old gay guy. But firstly, the fact that he talks as slowly as he does and he can't find better words off the cuff, like, it just with the amount of dramatic pauses that you're saying, that you're just stuck with this same, on the one hand, you've got this guy, and on the other hand, the exact template that I've heard from everybody else. This is what you're rolling back out. You're coming out in the final quarter as the smooth talking person who can rally the troops, and you've just got this same bullshit talking point. On the one hand, you've got this guy who will ruin the entire country and is a racist. And on the other one, you got the person who will pretend to be just like you, even though she's not even black and she's an Indian. And you black men, you better get in line and start supporting this lady.
Yeah.
Who, by the way, I've spoken to black people and I've heard them say Jamaican people hate American blacks. I've heard them say nobody hates black people more than Kamala Harris. She's an Indian Jamaican. And it, like, even CNN's tried to run footage out of barbershops with people being like, no, she's not black.
Well, you also wonder, you know, one of the things about Barack Obama, and, you know, he's never, this is true for Donald Trump too, by the way. While they are individually the most successful, you know, the most successful Democratic politician, the most successful Republican politician of the last, say, 20 years, you know, no doubt. They both put together coalitions that, I mean, look, you could say Joe Biden's 2020 election, but nobody, for the people who believe in that election, none of them really believe it was Joe Biden. It was a rejection of Donald Trump. So leaving him aside.
Corpses like the old guy.
Well, yes, but they sure do. Those corpses stick together. But, you know, you have, neither of them have been able to transfer that very well. Like, if you look at the people they endorse, they're no more likely to win than if they don't get their endorsement. But so Barack Obama, of course, he's not the candidate. So you don't get all of the qualities that Barack Obama brought to the table. You just get him supporting somebody else here. But part of the reason why I think this falls so flat, and I think a lot of people in like a lot of black people have woken up to this. And I think that's why Donald Trump is right now polling better with black people than any Republican in my lifetime, is that, you know, it's like for Obama to come out and start like lecturing black people, particularly black men, about how you're just basically a bunch of sexists, you know, you're a bigot, that's why you're not voting, which is pretty funny that the bigotry allegation can be weaponized against black men. You know, like, if you know anything about the history of black men in this country, they've just always been so prejudiced against everybody else. It's been really horrible the way they've kept every other group down. By the way, also, which fucks with like the intersectional types, but black men have been substantially more victimized in this country than black women have. Not saying black women haven't had points where they've been treated poorly, but black men were always treated substantially worse. But regardless of any of that, it's like, Barack Obama, you live in Martha's Vineyard. Like, get the fuck out of here, dude. Even the Clintons went and built their little office in Harlem after they fucking left the White House, right? So they could kind of keep like some semblance of like, oh, I'm still with the people. You know what I mean? Obama's done none of that. Obama is worth, I'm trying to figure, I'm looking it up here. It says AOL.com says he's worth 70 million.
I think it's over 100.
I thought I had seen over 100 before, but you know,
a lot of it's that Netflix money.
Well, I will say
And
that
then he had that Spotify contract, which went nowhere. Also, I think that was like 20 million alone.
Well, I know. I will say the net worth things when you Google them are never exactly right. People don't know your net worth, but just saying the Obamas had like a couple $1 million when they went into the White House. They had like I think like $2 or $3 million between the two of them. And he was president for 8 years. And now they are worth somewhere in the ballpark of $100 million. And yeah, it's like, you remember that thriving business that they opened that helped so many people that everyone just, no, you don't. They've just gotten this off like book deals and Netflix deals and Spotify deals and speeches to financial institutions and stuff like that. And it's like, to sit here, you know, to have just enriched yourself through this, you know, as Liz Cheney, that was one of her comments was dedicated a life to public service, right? That's why Kamala Harris is better than Donald Trump, because she's a career politician. That just makes you a better person. But when you see these people who are, you know, in service, that's how they put it. They're public servants. Well, it's hard for me to really see you as the servant when you end up worth $100 million. You know, seems like maybe you were serving yourself a little bit more than you were just serving other people's. I don't know. I don't really have any servants. But if I did, I'd imagine they'd make less money than me. I don't imagine my servant would be far richer than I could ever dream of being. And if they were, I'm not so sure I'd consider them my servant, you know? But so part of it is that it's like the nerve of you to like be, first off, you have, if you ever were a part of the black community, and I say this to Barack Obama because like he's half white and was raised by a white family, but whatever. But you have completely removed yourself from the black community, but in every sense, physically, financially, intellectually, like in every sense. And then you're coming back into like lecture these, like I'm just saying, if an old white Republican ever talked this way to like black men, we'd all recognize it for what it is. And you'd be like, oh, you're looking down at these people. Like you think you're better than them. And it's clear, like he does. He does think he's better than them. But like, again, it's like, it's a lot of it is like the same thing as, and this happens as, particularly in an inflationary economy, right? Like what ends up happening is that the middle class gets wiped out. And the gap between the wealthy and everybody else gets bigger and bigger. And what you have is more and more people in that wealthy bubble tend to lecture everybody else about like having the wrong priorities or something like that. But the thing is that when you're not in that wealthy group, you have less of an ability to remove yourself from issues that really matter and just focus on superficial things like she's a woman with dark skin. Like that doesn't matter. You know what I mean? But when you're worth 70 million or 100 million or whatever Obama's worth, it's easy to really focus on those things. Whereas like my guess is that most black men, like most Americans, are a lot more concerned with the economy. A lot more concerned with immigration, a lot more concerned with the opioid crisis, a lot more concerned with homelessness, with crime, with all of these other things that like have a real impact on your life. And you know what does not have a real impact on your life is like whether it's a chick or a dude who's in the White House. So I don't think really, I mean, I'm sure there is some, there's a hurdle that a female presidential candidate has to get over for sure. I mean, we are like, you know, we're animals, and when electing a president, there's a lot of like monkey brain shit that comes into that, where you're like, hey, this is the alpha, And so I do think that, like, in some respects, a man has an advantage over a woman. There's something more masculine about being the commander-in-chief. Commander-in-chief doesn't sound particularly feminine when you say it. But to pretend that that's the major motivating driving factor here behind the black people supporting Trump, I just don't see any evidence of that. And if you know, in, like you said, in those barbershop videos, in all of the man on the street videos where you see all the black people are supporting Trump, you always ask them what it is. They always answer with one of the things I just said. They're always just like, no, it's crime, it's immigration, it's the economy, it's the jobs, you know? I don't see why the assumption wouldn't be that, like, yeah, that's what's motivating them.
Also a tough pitch for a past president to go, hey, we got to band together as a racial group.
Yeah. Well, it's, you know, there's definitely something about that too. I also just, I do just really resent the phoniness of all of it, where it's like, now I want to talk to the brothers. Now y'all know you've been doing that, and it's like, what are you going into your black voice now?
Someone get me one of my Newports.
Yeah, but it is really that. It's like, dude, I've heard you talk a lot, and now you're just like completely switching the way you talk to act as if like you're
Have
in
you
this in group.
seen the caboose on my man wife? I'm doing the worst accent, but you get the joke.
It tickled me. Anyway, again, I just took this as one more sign that you're like, it's like, okay, you guys clearly are concerned. And then the second thing is, it's like, and this is what you're going with? Obama calling you a bigot, and we got Liz Cheney? That's the strategy here? All right. Best of luck. All right, here, let's before we get out of here, let's do one more. What's the next one? Oh, another Obama. All right, here we go.
Knew it wasn't true. Even local Republicans said it was not true. And now the people of Florida are dealing with another devastating storm. And I want you to watch what happens over the next few days, just like the last time. You're going to have leaders who try to help, and then you have a guy who will just lie about it to score political points, and this has consequences. Because people are afraid and they've lost everything, and now they're trying to figure out, how do I apply for help? And some of them may be discouraged from getting the help they need. The idea of intentionally trying to deceive people in their most desperate and vulnerable moments. And my question is, when did that become okay? I'm not looking for applause right now. I want to ask Republicans out there, you know, people who are conservative, who didn't vote for me, who didn't agree with me. I had friends who disagreed with me on every issue. When did that become okay? Why would we go along with that? I mean, if your coworkers acted like that, they wouldn't be your coworkers very long. If you're in business and somebody you're doing business with just outright lies and manipulates, you stop doing business with them. Even if you had a family member who acted like that, you might still love them, but you tell them you got a problem. And you wouldn't put them in charge of anything. And yet, when Donald Trump lies or cheats or shows utter disregard for our Constitution, when he calls POWs losers,
I think we can gag all there.
Citizens.
Yeah.
I love the Meryl Streep moment he has of the how dare you criticize the administration's response to these hurricanes.
Well, he also said, he asked a very specific question. He said, when did that become okay? And it's 2005.
Yeah.
That's when it became okay, during Hurricane Katrina. It was something that you, Barack Obama, weaponized against George W. Bush. And absolutely nobody ever said, no, that's off limits. You're not allowed to criticize an administration for how they handle a natural disaster. And you're certainly not allowed to point out that, like, hey, resources are finite. We only have so many. And we're sending all of these resources to Ukraine and to Israel. We're spending a ton of resources on illegal immigrants who broke our laws in order to come here. And then American citizens, taxpayers, are left without any of these resources. That's over the line? And look, again, it's just that this is the thing about Obama that is really like just ugly and off-putting. Is even when they start clapping and then he goes, I'm not looking for applause. There is this like superiority about him. And this was by the way, this was one of the things I noticed very early in 2008 about Obama, is that he was an incredibly talented politician. There's no question about that. But he was great as long as he was giving an uninterrupted speech. You know, like that's kind of where he's at his best. But you realize quickly that in his mind, the role was always for him to be the professor and you to be the student. You're here to learn from his wisdom. Even though, again, as like when I was quoting from his speech before, he wasn't actually teaching you anything. He's just making you feel good, you know? But it was always that. But then there was this other side to him that was like incredibly superior. Like if you ever were to, first off, you know, he's this thing about, it goes, you know, what do you say? Disrespecting the Constitution or something like that. Obama, you murdered American citizens without charges. Okay? Grossly violated the War Powers Act. It was under Obama's administration, not George W. Bush's, that he declared that the battlefield was the world. And so essentially the president had the authority now to go to war anywhere they wanted to without, you know, don't get me wrong, George W. Bush cheated on the Constitution too and never got a declaration of war for Afghanistan or Iraq. He got a vague, what do they call it? The authorization of military force, you know. But he got something. He went to Congress. He went to Congress for Afghanistan, you know, and for Iraq and had votes. They were not declarations of war, which the Constitution demands they should be. But he still got votes from Congress. But when it came to Obama's war in Libya, in Syria, in Yemen, nothing. Congress had no say in them, okay? It's like, give me a fucking break about respecting the Constitution. The Constitution is so crystal clear that only Congress can declare war. You know, it's like, give me a break about all that bullshit, your high and mighty shit. But then it's like the argument itself just makes no sense. He's almost arguing that somehow if you criticize FEMA, then people aren't going to get the help that they need. Like he kind of tries to make it sound like it makes a little bit of sense, where he's like, think about the person who's applying for help and then they hear Donald Trump criticizing FEMA. And you're like, yeah? So what happens then? What, they don't apply for help now? Like, come on, this is all ridiculous.
On the last Run Your Mouth, I did a run through of the Democratic propaganda points, and this is a quick one for them, is to point out how anything is dangerous. And I have a Jew mom, so I can recognize these guilty nonsense tactics right off the bat, and he's a gay guy, so he's playing the same cards. And that's why he's up there going, this is dangerous. You're criticizing it. It's dangerous because now people aren't going to go and try and get the support that we're giving to them. Can you cite a single example of someone that listened to Donald Trump and now was supposed to get help and isn't getting help because he heard and didn't file? Is there a single incident of that? Because if not, it just sounds to me like Jew guilt.
No, well,
how dare you? This is actually dangerous.
Well, it's also... you know, it's pretty standard, a pretty standard playbook for how politicians always guard against criticism of themselves, which is it's always dangerous to criticize the government.
Pointing out our failures is divisive, and it creates.
Dude, I remember Bush and Cheney were I'm going to say the worst at it, but maybe they were just the dumbest with it, but it was the most like transparent. But this was literally, they would explicitly say this after 9/11, that it was like, if you criticize the regime, you're giving comfort to the terrorists. That was George Bush's line. You're either with us or you're with the terrorists. And so if you criticize the fact that, like, hey, you know, we spend tens of billions of dollars on intelligence and you guys didn't see 9/11 coming and you didn't protect your own people that day, well, you're basically on the side of the terrorists now. If you criticize the war in Afghanistan or the war in Iraq, well, then you're against the troops. Are you with the troops or with the terrorists, you know? And then this becomes everything. Like, if you criticize the government's healthcare, that's dangerous. If you criticize the response to a storm, that's dangerous. If you question the last election, that's dangerous. Like, but there's no logic for any of it. It's actually not dangerous at all. It's actually, what's far more dangerous is watching your government fail you on every level and not saying anything about it. That's dangerous. You know what I mean? But this is, I mean, again, I guess the theme that kind of, to me, you know, the through line of this episode is that the Democrats are starting to panic a bit now. And as is typically the case with human beings, when you panic, you don't make your best decisions. And I think you see right here in this moment that they're panicking, and the strategy is unbelievably stupid.
Before we call it an episode, we do have that bombshell of a Kamala Harris clip left.
All right, sure.
Yeah.
Let's do it. Here, let's do one more.
It makes you wonder, why does his staff want him to hide away? One must question, are they afraid that people will see that he is too weak and unstable to lead America? Is that what's going on? And here's the
yeah, what can you even say about this desperate attempt? It's always been a dynamic with the Democrats and Trump that they always, like, there'll be a million things that are legitimate to criticize him on, and then they pick the most ridiculous one and go with that. And you're like, I mean, this is just so obviously projection. You know, she hid from interviews up until the last 2 weeks. And I mean, look, of all the criticisms of Donald Trump, and we have really been pretty ferocious on him over the last 8 years. But of all the criticisms of Donald Trump, yeah, he avoids the spotlight. That's what he's always been known for. Donald Trump, always hiding. He's doing interviews with everybody. He's like on every freaking show. I think we've covered just about every single Kamala Harris interview on this show. There's been tons of Trumps we haven't covered because he just does so goddamn many of them. You couldn't cover every single one. I haven't even watched every single one. You know, like, there's just so many. And so it's just, it's like, I never use this word, but this is just an exercise in gaslighting. Like, you're gonna tell us that that's the truth, that you're out there, but Trump is hiding,
and admits Biden.
Yeah.
Admits Biden's presidency.
Right.
You're going to accuse somebody else of not being up to the
that's
job and hiding away.
Yeah, really. It's like literally right now, the sitting president of the United States of America is rarely heard from.
They can't even get him in the Oval Office. They got him at that little teeny tiny desk that's outside for no reason.
Oh my God.
With no explanation for why.
Some of the clips today, and he's like, he's mumbling under his breath.
He's talking in tongues. That's his new thing.
It's the most, like, unbelievable even for, you know, people like us who kind of live in this world and talk about it all the time. It's unbelievable. I literally just watched this morning these clips of it. It's just an old man mumbling under his breath. It's a weird. Well, I don't like. I almost wonder in a way. There's something really scary about it.
I got a perfect policy. We're gonna.
But isn't there something really scary about, like, losing your mind? You're almost like, man, I'd lose anything else. I don't want to lose my mind. Like, you know, if I lost like an arm or a leg or something, you're like, okay, that would suck. But like, okay, at least you're still there. Like, you still exist. But you start losing your mind. That is like, it's a form of death. But you look at it and you're almost like, dude, what's it like to be like in that mental state where you're just whispering and no one can understand you, and it doesn't like trigger in your mind like, oh, raise my volume, speak with a little more clarity. Anyway, yeah. With the campaign that Biden ran in 2020, with the presidency of Joe Biden, and with the campaign that Kamala Harris is running, to accuse